we come this day once again to be reminded of the powerful Spirit that calls forth the church. And we come to give thanks for all the ways we are blessed by the church. Amen. I grew up in a household that was bilingual. My grandmother, who was born in Germany and came to this country when she was in her late teens, came to live with us when I was 6. Until then, I don't think I even knew that she spoke German. When she came to America in the early 20th century, it was all about learning English. She could speak, read, and write beautifully in English, no accent. This was especially important when you were from a country that was on the wrong side of World War I and World War II. So until she came to live with us, I don't think I even realized that my grandma knew German. And I certainly did not know that my mother spoke German. That was a shock when Grandma came to live with us. Why was there suddenly German being spoken in our family on a daily basis when Grandma Mantell came to live with us? Well, German was reserved for the things that my mother and grandmother did not want my brother and I to understand. It was their secret language. And then my dad was left out too, but he grew up with a mother and father from Italy, not Germany, so too bad. Didn't seem to bother him. But whenever there was something of a sensitive nature or something my brother and I were not to know about, the German began. And sometimes there was a lot of German going down in our house. Now, for our family, the use of another language was meant to prevent understanding by some. It was intended to restrict communication. That is the complete opposite of what we hear about in the Pentecost story. Thousands have gathered in the city of Jerusalem from all around the many countries and territories of the Middle East and beyond for the Jewish festival of Pentecost. It was a harvest festival after the first harvest of the year. And the people came from all over, and they spoke many, many languages. The little cadre of scared Galilean disciples were laying low after the events around Jesus' death. Now, Galileans were known for being, well, we'll be nice, provincial, not worldly, and certainly not competent in other languages. But this little band, they get the Spirit, we're told in the story, the wind, the flames. And we're told about how they burst out into the street, joining the crowds and spewing the gospel of love in each and every different language imaginable. Wow! The idea here is that the gospel of love is for everyone. It is life-giving for all. It is a gift intended for everyone. God is blessing all of creation through the gospel of love. The Spirit enables the gospel to be bestowed upon all flesh. No language barriers, no gender identity barriers, no racial barriers, no age barriers, no religious barriers, no economic barriers upon all flesh, no exclusions or exceptions. And of course, not only are the crowds surprised at this display, but the followers of Jesus themselves are amazed at what they are doing. This is the gospel that I know, that I have heard, and that controls my life, I hope. A gospel of love for all flesh. So recently I went to an event at another church. And up in the front of the church, across the chancel, is a huge stained glass installation of, well, 12 men. I'm sorry, but to me, that does not say gospel of love. To me, that says exclusion. That says misogyny. That says patriarchy. I would find it very difficult, if not impossible, to go to that church every Sunday and be confronted by that cabal of male characters. And if I had to be the pastor of a church with such a display, I would have to begin each and every service and event explaining that the windows remind us of how the church has twisted the gospel of love, and that it's our calling to untwist it and make sure we are including all flesh, not just centering male human flesh. Many churches today are proud of being progressive. What is progressive? What does it mean to be a progressive church? I asked this of a small UCC clergy group that I'm part of. One person mentioned that they are marketing their church as progressive. And I asked, well, what does that mean? The conversation kind of languished for a moment. Everyone was just quiet on the Zoom. Then the explanation was offered that the term progressive was used to describe churches that are open and affirming, gay and trans friendly. That's what people are thinking when they use that word associated with the church. The pastor whose church is using the word acknowledged that progressive could mean so much more. I want to talk about that more. I want to share with you the language that conveys the gospel of love to me. For one thing, I need to hear the gospel of love in a language that is not only non-patriarchal, but is anti-patriarchal. A language that does not incorporate, affirm, or assume a system of power that puts some people over other people based on gender or color or historical precedent. And it's not a language of conquest, domination, or empire that are associated with patriarchy. And it's not a language based on stereotypes or entrenched bias. Scholars tell us that patriarchy is undergirded and supported by male language and imagery for the divine. So I do not hear the gospel of love in language dominated by male terminology or imagery for God. That conveys support of patriarchy and oppression in my lexicon, so it's not consistent with the gospel of love for me. Here at Lakewood, we try to minimize the use of male terminology and imagery for God, as well as for humanity. I was trained that way, so the things I say reflect that. And many years ago, when we had a worship committee here at the church, the committee asked if we could read from the Inclusive Language Bible each Sunday in church. And that was endorsed by our church council. So each week we read still from the Inclusive Language Bible, translated by Priests for Equality, yes, Catholics, who translated from the original biblical languages, not from a previous translation, into Greek or Latin or German or English. Trying to communicate the gospel of love in non-patriarchal language is harder when it comes to hymns and music. Much church music with beautiful intent is laced with patriarchal language. We do our best to try to be inclusive without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Sometimes in the bulletin, you will see the notation adapted. The change is often around male language. Like instead of saying man, we'll say humanity. For me, I have a really hard time hearing or understanding the gospel of love when it's presented consistently in male terminology and imagery, because that communicates to me a system of power over, not power with. A system of not of abuse, not a system of cooperation and mutuality. Now, the gospel of love is also communicated to me in a language that is non-anthropomorphic. Language that does not humanize God. You know, the old white man in the sky. I once saw an adult education video in which the theologian presenting said something about the Bible telling us that humanity was created in God's image. But we have turned that around to a God created in humanity's image. I don't hear the gospel of love from a superhero God. We have been given incredibly creative minds, and even in ancient times, people spoke of God in ways that went far beyond anthropomorphism. They talked about God as greening, as wind and flame, as mystery, God as rock, like the rock in the front of our chancel, God as force, gravity, God as beauty, God as spirit. There are so many ways to image presence and power of God beyond making God a superhuman. That helps me to hear the gospel of love, non-anthropomorphic language. Now, another aspect of communicating the gospel that helps me to hear the gospel of love is conveying divine love not only for humanity, but for all of creation. I would describe this as hearing the gospel in a non-anthropocentric way. So often the love of God is described and conveyed referring to what it does for humans, how it affects humans, how it's related to humans. The rest of creation, oh well. God came to us in Jesus to save humans from their sin, we say. Maybe the idea is that the other species and manifestations of creation don't need saving, so no need to include them in this gospel of love. I think that kind of thinking has enabled us to abuse nature and devastate the natural world around us. The church has chosen to present a very human-oriented version of the gospel of love. I'm about hearing that gospel of love in a version That includes all of nature and creation, not just the human species. In Acts, we're reminded of the Spirit being poured out upon all flesh. My dog is flesh. The chicken that provided the meat for the dinner you ate last night is flesh. The fish in the beautiful Gulf of Mexico are flesh. The spider in your bathtub, is that flesh?
No.
The wildflower under your foot? The tree in the median? And of course, all the plants that keep us alive by providing food, all sacred. The gospel of love, to me, is not just about humanity. It's about all flesh and everything that sustains all flesh. All flesh on this planet, and maybe all flesh, or something like it, in the great infinite cosmos that we don't even know about yet. All deserving of dignity, respect, and reverence. Church language that is not exclusively centered on what God does for the human species, that is not anthropocentric, that conveys the gospel of love to me. I have one more comment to make about the language that conveys the gospel of love for me, and that language is communal in nature. It's plural. It's about us, we, the group, the community of life. It is not exclusively forever and ever, amen, individual and personal. Me, 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 I. God, do this for me. God, hear me. God, pay attention to me. God, help me. Jesus was Jewish, and the Jewish religion is about community, the whole group. Punishment and blessing was meted out upon the community, even if the offense was perpetuated by a small group. Jesus was about community. He starts his ministry by recruiting others, and that continues throughout his ministry, in which he recruits both men and women, and it's about the group. Their full experience of the gospel is in community. Solidarity. Our culture promotes the cult of individualism. We are not committed to the good of the whole, but to the promotion of the interests of the individual. An extreme example is the attitude around guns. The individual is entitled to own a gun, period. The threat to the community takes a back seat to the rights of the individual. That's our culture, the cult of individualism. We give people vouchers for education, despite that undermines the funding of the public school system. Again, that's about the individualist instead of the group. And all of this individualism is reflected in the church. It's about the individual being saved by God and going to heaven, individual salvation. Community is secondary, as is the commitment to help others in the world around us. You can get your heart right with God and be assured of your heavenly reward without lifting a finger to help anybody. That's a classic view of the church. And as Martin Luther King pointed out, Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. And today, we know not only to think about segregation as a matter of race, but perhaps today, it's even more a matter of income. Poor people simply do not feel welcome in the mainline church for the most part, because so many things about the church reinforce the assumptions about people's income, resources, and relationship to money. We try to keep that in mind here at Lakewood. Being open and affirming means welcoming all, including the homeless poor and the person who has political views different from yours. And it means being about we, not just me, when it comes to religion. We all sink or swim together. What you do has an effect on others and upon nature and upon the earth. And being committed to the gospel of love means being aware of that. We realize we are communitarian. This is another consideration that leads to adapted in your bulletin. Many of the prayers and readings we use were originally written in the singular. Heal me, do this for me, help me. When we are here in corporate worship as a group and as a community, this is often changed to us, because we want to convey the gospel of love to those who hear in a communitarian language. In the Pentecost story, we're told of wind and flames. Of course, fire needs air. It cannot burn without air. Fire needs wind to spread. But wind can also blow out a fire. Just try to keep a candle lit on a windy evening at an outdoor service on Ash Wednesday. The candles are blown out. Wind can extinguish fire. Many do not want to see changes in the church in terms of conveying a broader scope of the gospel of love, because they think it will drive people away from church. They think they will lose members. They're already facing survival issues, and look at the churches that seem to be thriving. It's about a male God endorsing patriarchy, saving human beings one by one. Embrace a fuller, more faithful expression of the gospel of love, and the flame will be extinguished. That's the current thinking. I mentioned to our conference minister once, when I was sitting next to him at a meeting, when we were asked what would we like to see changed in the church. People said, I'd like to see we give up the ice cream social every year. Things like that. When it was my turn, I said, I want a church that's non-anthropocentric and non-anthropomorphic. And my conference minister said, you're meddling now. That's true. I am meddling because I think a fuller expression of the gospel of love